I'm within 10 minutes walk of no less than 5 second-hand shops. Mostly run by charities, they have some interesting items. Picked up, amongst some other things, for the grand total of 70 cents, is this ship's radio operator's handbook. More than 30 years old, it's in almost mint condition, and it goes through what ship's operators need to know. In this retro review, I'll browse through the book and make a few other comments on it. It's the prescribed textbook for those doing the examination for the Restricted Operator Certificate of Proficiency in Radiotelephony. There's still reference to telegrams and other messages, and nearly everything in this book would now be obsolete. This was written in the days when HF was still the main communications medium for ships at sea. There is 27 MHz marine for recreational vessels close in, as well as VHF marine. But on the high seas, it was all HF. Reference is made to the international distress frequency of 2182 kHz, as well as other frequencies that are monitored by the Overseas Telecommunications Commission, or OTC. Having a look through the contents: General, Distress, Radio Telegram Services, Radio Telephone Subscribers, Limited Coast Stations, EPIRBs, and VHF Marine Communication. Most notable are the bright coloured pages in the middle of the book to do with distress procedure.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
It tells you exactly what you must do to transmit a distress message.
Mayday. Wait a minute, that's a code word, isn't it? It's the code name for those typhoons. No, those are all girls' names, like Harrison, Gloria, and Elsie. Mayday, mayday, that rings a bell somewhere. Mayday. Emergency distress signal. Help me.
The instructions are deliberately simple. It's quite possible that someone other than the ship's radio officer may have to use this information. Of note is that there are silence periods twice an hour on 2182. Between the top of the hour and 3 past, and half past the hour and 33 past. These were silence periods, and you could not transmit anything except for distress signals. Then there's what you must do in case there's a distress message, the phonetic alphabet, and a warning to keep equipment in good order. Going back to other parts of the book, Part 1 talks about the ship station operators, that they must be qualified and have suitable equipment. Part 6 talks about secrecy of communication. An operator should not divulge or make any use of any portion of text of any message transmitted, received or intercepted by his station, or disclose in any matter the existence of such message. Also a log keeping requirement, and what to do if there's interference. You must take precaution to ensure that your station doesn't. There are certain frequencies you can only use for distress or initial calls, and if you want to communicate further, you need to move somewhere else. As for station identification, you had to identify either using a call sign, the name of the vessel, or a combination of both. Ship radio communication had to be as brief as possible. I don't know how much this was observed in practice, but the manual was quite stern. Remarks not essential to the service and all superfluous conversations are strictly prohibited. And you couldn't swear. Next part talks about distress, urgency and safety. There's reference to Mayday call and the less well-known pan-pan message, with the assumption that you did French at school. Also important was a requirement to keep watch on particular frequencies, particularly 2182. Then procedure for distress messages. Quite a few more pages with example Mayday calls.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Sea-Witch VM6999. This is Sea-Witch VM6999. This is Sea-Witch VM6999. Mayday, this is Sea-Witch VM6999. 30 degrees 40 minutes south, 154 degrees 16 minutes east. Hull hold taking water. Fast estimated stay afloat 20 minutes. 4 adults on board. Over.
Alright, hang on, Mayday. I'm with you, Mayday. Carry on, Mayday.
Then there's a bit more about how you could relay another station's distress message. Procedures for doing that, called a Mayday relay.
This is emergency. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
Come in, Mayday. This is Sydney, Australia. I'm receiving you loud and clear. What's wrong?
No, it's not me. I've got a Mayday who's waiting for me to help him.
You lucky blinder. I've never had a Mayday since I started. Where is he?
You leave him alone. He's mine.
Then obligations to accept and acknowledge a distress message. Basically, if you're nearby, you had to acknowledge immediately. If you're not nearby, then you had to delay until others nearby had had a chance to respond, and if not, then to respond. Subsequent pages go on about exactly what to say when responding to a Mayday.
Wait a minute. I can't find my pencil. Hang on a minute. Don't sink yet. Hang on.
It's also covered for pan messages and safety signals, Security. Quaint by today's standards is the radiotelegram service. This could be done through coast stations. Telegrams were kept short. At the time this was published, the charge for radiotelegrams sent between places in Australia and Australian ships through coast stations is 65 cents a word. If you wanted more priority, then you could pay double. Just for context, sending a letter through the post cost around 30 cents at the time this book was written. Another service that was offered was free medical advice, also via radiotelegram. The book also talks about communication between ship stations. You could communicate privately, but again, messages had to be kept short and restricted to traffic concerning the safety, movement and operations in which vessels were engaged. Before mobile phones, it was possible to arrange a phone patch between a coast station and someone on a vessel so that they could communicate with someone at home. These services were offered by OTC stations in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, Townsville and Darwin. Calls had to be booked in advance and particular frequencies used. Also covered in this manual are EPIRBs. EPIRBs then operated on 1 or 2 VHF frequencies, 121.5 and 243 MHz. For shipping closer in, VHF provides clearer reception and less interference. The book is brief and easy to read. Appendix 1 contains a log. There are particular log keeping requirements. The log includes date and time, station from, station to, details of call signals and distress working, and the frequency. Similar to an amateur log, except there's no space for a signal report. What did you need to know to get a Restricted Operator Certificate of Proficiency? You had to apply to the Department of Communications, pay an exam fee, and you must be over 17. You had to have a practical knowledge of radio equipment, be able to send and receive correctly messages by radio telephone, a knowledge of the regulations, and a knowledge of safety precautions. Also of interest to amateurs as well as marine radio users is this guide to propagation. Medium frequencies around 2 MHz had a daytime range of 50 to 100 miles. At night, greater ranges could be expected. There is less overseas interference on 2 MHz than you get on higher frequencies. Then at 4 MHz, this was amongst the most versatile frequency band because it could cover 300 miles during the day and also long distances at night. Then up at 6 MHz, it suggested that it could be used during the day for long distances, where 4 MHz peters out. There could be additional overseas interference because they're longer range, particularly at night. You would generally only use 6 MHz if lower frequency communication was unsatisfactory. Appendix 4 contains a list of regional offices that were then maintained by the Department of Transport and Communications. I believe these have pretty much all gone, but there were some in regional centres as well as capital cities around Australia. Many amateurs will have memories of going to these offices to pick up a call sign or pay their licence fee. And then finally an index.
My position, I just gave it to you.
I'm sorry, I lost you. Would you mind repeating it?
Oh, the incompetent. Is there anyone else there? This is an emergency.
No, there's nobody else here. I'm quite capable of handling it.
Well, pull yourself together, for heaven's sake.
Now, look here, my good man. Don't you take that tone of voice at me. I'm doing my best. It's not my fault you got a hole in your boat.
This has been an interesting look at marine radio communication history. Just a few years later, mobile phones and satellite communication was to greatly revolutionise it. The number of coast stations was cut back and other means of communication more widely used. If there's a second-hand or charity shop near you, always make time to drop in and see what they have on offer. You may well walk out with a piece of radio history.